My father's heart stopped at 4:17 on a Wednesday afternoon. By 8:30 that same evening, his wife had changed the locks on the front door. When I came downstairs with my overnight bag, she was already waiting in the hallway, standing still, composed, like she had been rehearsing this moment since the hospital called. "This is my house now. Pack your things and go." There was no anger in her voice. No grief. Just control. I had a duffel bag, a laptop, and a set of keys, to a place she didn't even know existed. I zipped the bag, walked past her without saying a word, and left. She had no idea what she had just done. Welcome back to Calm Confession Stories, where the quiet ones always have the last word. If you're new here, subscribe, because what happens next is something you're going to want to hear. The Wednesday before my father died, I drove 40 minutes to his house for dinner, just like I did every week. Linda had made pot roast. She always made pot roast on Wednesdays. And she always set 3 places at the table. Mine was never one of them. I used to notice. Then I used to mention it. And eventually, I stopped doing both. I came in through the side door, opened the cabinet, took out my plate, and placed it at the corner of the table, where the placemat was slightly shorter than the others. The routine was so familiar, it no longer required thought. My father was sitting in his usual chair when I walked in. But something about him had changed. He looked smaller. His skin had that pale, faded tone, like old newspaper. His hand trembled slightly when he picked up his fork. Linda kept saying it was just a loss of appetite. But I knew better. I had already checked his medical records. It was his heart. Across the table, Cora, Linda's daughter, was scrolling through her phone, her chair pushed back, one knee pulled up. She was 24 and still living at home. Linda called it smart. I didn't call it anything. Halfway through dinner, my father set his fork down and looked at me. "Did you get that building file sorted out?" I opened my mouth to answer. "Douglas, not at dinner." Linda cut in immediately. "We were talking about the remodel." My father looked at me. I looked at him. Then he picked up his fork again and said nothing. That's how it always ended. After dinner, I washed the dishes. That was part of the routine too. On the counter next to the sink, there was a stack of mail, an electric bill, an insurance statement, and a letter from a law firm addressed to Douglas Irving. Unopened. I glanced at the return address. Before I could read it, Linda swept the entire stack into a drawer. "Just junk," she said. I dried my hands and left. On the drive home, the smell of onions from the skillet clung to my coat. At the highway merge, I rolled the window down and let the cold air pull it out. I didn't know it at the time. But that was the last Wednesday I would ever eat in that house. My mother died when I was 10. Her name was Helen. She had brown hair, a quiet laugh, and a way of folding laundry that made it look like she was thinking about something far away. I remember the laundry more clearly than I remember the funeral. After she was gone, my father didn't know how to handle a 10-year-old girl who cried in the bathtub every night. He wasn't built for emotional conversations. He was built for numbers. So he taught me math. Every Saturday morning, we drove around in his old truck. Not to buy houses. Just to look at them. He would stop in front of a property and ask, "What do you think this one's worth?" I would guess. He would correct me. And then he would explain square footage, lot size, comparable sales, interest rates. Why a north-facing kitchen could lower value in winter markets. I didn't understand everything. But I understood that he was talking to me. And that was enough. By the time I was 12, I could read a mortgage statement faster than most adults. I could estimate property tax from a listing photo. I could tell if a house was overpriced just from how it was described. One Saturday, sitting in the truck, he said, "Money doesn't fix everything, but it fixes more than people like to admit." That same year, he married Linda. And slowly, everything changed. Linda wasn't cruel in the way people expect. She didn't yell. She didn't punish. She reorganized. Within 6 months, my bedroom had been repainted pink. And renamed, Chorus Playroom. I was moved into the smallest room in the house. The one next to the garage. It smelled like motor oil and cold concrete. My father said, Linda had a difficult life before. Be patient. I was 12. I was patient. Linda wasn't. Over the next 2 years, every part of the house shifted. Photos were replaced. First, pictures of my mother were moved to the hallway. Then upstairs. Then into a box in the attic labeled old frames. In their place came new photos, Linda, Douglas, and Cora. Matching outfits. Perfect smiles. I wasn't in any of them. Even the finances changed. Linda tracked everything. Every grocery receipt, every gas bill, every subscription, all recorded in a spreadsheet. She called it the family budget review. It was the only meeting I was never invited to. When I asked my father about it, he explained that Linda had struggled financially in her first marriage. She had been left with nothing. No savings. No credit. No security. Control made her feel safe. I understood that. For a while. But understanding something doesn't make it easier to live with. Especially when that understanding is used to slowly push you out of your own home. By the time I was 14, I had the smallest room, no place at the table, and a name that didn't make it onto Christmas cards. That was the year I stopped expecting anyone to fix it. The summer I turned 16, my father took me to his office on a Saturday morning. It wasn't unusual for me to be there. I had spent years sitting quietly in the corner while he worked, flipping through property listings or running numbers on a calculator. But this time was different. He closed the door. That had never happened before. He sat across from me, opened a manila folder, and turned it so I could see inside. I started this for you 2 years ago, he said. Inside was a statement. An investment account. Balance, $6,200. It was $5,000 when I opened it. I stared at the number. I didn't fully understand compound interest yet. Not in a real way. But I understood what this meant. He was building something for me. It's in your name, he said. I looked up at him. In my name? He nodded. Then, before I could say anything else. Don't mention this to Linda. I hesitated. Why? He raised his hand slightly, stopping me. Not because it's wrong. Because she worries about anything she can't track. That was his way of saying everything, without saying too much. That morning, he taught me how to read the statement. How to check performance. How to compare it against the market. Then he handed me something small. A pocket calculator. Cheap plastic. Slightly cracked on the side. Keep this, he said. Do your own math. Always. I kept it. I still have it. Over the next 2 years, the account grew. Not dramatically. Not overnight. A few hundred added here. 1,000 there. Slow. Quiet. Consistent. Just like everything my father believed in. Around that same time, he started mentioning something else. A building. A commercial property downtown. 6 floors. Mostly office space. He had bought into it years earlier, when the area wasn't worth much. Someday this will be yours, he said once. He said it casually. The way other fathers might talk about handing down a watch or a truck. I didn't ask questions. By then, I had learned something important. When my father gave me something, the best thing I could do was accept it quietly. The office was silent except for the hum of the desk lamp and the low static of the AM radio he always kept playing. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower ran. Inside, numbers were being built. By the time I turned 18, things had already changed more than I realized. The account had grown. The building, the one he talked about so casually, wasn't just an idea anymore. The first shares had already been transferred into my name. I didn't tell anyone. There was nothing to tell. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was just paperwork. I left for college the same year. No arguments. No goodbye scenes. I packed 2 suitcases, put them in the used car my father helped me buy, and drove 4 hours away. Linda waved from the kitchen window. Cora didn't look up from the television. That was enough. My apartment was small. 1 room. 1 window facing a parking lot. A radiator that made noise at night. And a coffee maker I bought from a thrift store for $7. The coffee tasted terrible. I drank it every morning anyway. Because for the first time in years, I could breathe. My father called every Sunday. Always at the same time. 9 a.m. Before Linda woke up. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about numbers. The account. The building. Market conditions. Interest rates. Returns. He never asked how I was doing. I never asked how things were at home. That was our language. And somehow, it worked. Every time I visited, something in the house had changed. The first year, my old bedroom had become a yoga studio. A mat on the floor. Incense by the window. Soft music from a wall speaker. The second year, the garage had been turned into a craft room for Cora. The third year. Even the photos were gone. Not moved. Gone. There wasn't a single picture of me left on the first floor. Not one. Linda never asked about my life. Not my job. Not my income. Not my plans. She looked at my clothes, my car, the way I carried myself, and assumed everything she needed to assume. That I was doing fine. Nothing more. Meanwhile, my father kept transferring assets. Small portions at a time. Quietly. Legally. Carefully. By the time I was 28, the building was entirely in my name. The neighborhood had changed. What used to be low-value commercial space had turned into something else entirely. New businesses. Higher rents. Full occupancy. The property was now worth more than every house on our street combined. Linda never mentioned it. Because she never knew it existed. And I never told her. Because I didn't need to. By the time I turned 32, everything was already set. The account had grown far beyond what it started as. The building had become the foundation of something much larger. And everything was legally mine. Then my father got sick. It started quietly. Fatigue. Shortness of breath. Doctor visits. Then the diagnosis came. Severe cardiomyopathy. The doctors said it could be managed. Medication. Monitoring. Rest. What they didn't say was that access would become a problem. The first time I called to visit, Linda answered. He's resting. The second time? He doesn't want visitors right now. The third time. I didn't call. I just drove there. She met me at the door. Didn't let me in. Paige, he needs calm, she said. You showing up like this isn't calm. Then she closed the door. I stood on the porch for 2 minutes. Then I left. That night, I called my Aunt Maggie. She didn't waste time. Linda has been telling people you're too busy to visit. I sat up straight. I've called 14 times. I know, Maggie said. Then after a pause. She also got your father to sign a financial power of attorney last week. Everything went quiet. Not because of the money. That part didn't matter anymore. Because I understood what was happening. Linda wasn't just managing his care. She was controlling access. Controlling information. Controlling the story. She was building a wall. And my father was too weak to stop it. 3 weeks later, he had his second stroke. This time, Linda called everyone. Family. Neighbors. Church. She organized everything. Everyone knew. Except me. I didn't hear it from her. I heard it from a hospital nurse. Because years earlier, my father had listed me as the emergency contact. He died on a Wednesday. Of course it was a Wednesday. The hospital called at 4:21 in the afternoon. A nurse with a calm, practiced voice told me that Douglas Irving had suffered another cardiac event and hadn't survived. She asked if I needed a moment. I said no. I said thank you. And I told her I'd be there that night. I drove 3 hours in the dark. No music. No calls. No thoughts that stayed long enough to settle. Just the road, and the memory of the last time I had seen him. 6 weeks earlier. Through the kitchen window. He had been sitting at the table while Linda stood in the doorway, blocking me from coming inside. He raised his hand. Not waving. Just holding it there. I drove away. That was the last time I saw him alive. When I reached the house, there were cars in the driveway. Neighbors. A few relatives. The porch light was on. Through the window, I could see Linda in the kitchen, arranging white flowers into a glass vase like she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. I didn't go through the front door. I used the side entrance. The way I always had. Upstairs, my old room, the yoga studio, still looked the same. The mat. The incense. The speaker on the wall. I set my duffel bag down and sat on the floor. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then Linda appeared in the doorway. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. You're not sleeping here. Her voice was steady. This is my house now. Your father would have wanted it that way. I looked around the room. Nothing in it was mine anymore. Not really. Okay, I said. I picked up my bag, walked past her, and went downstairs. Cora was standing halfway on the staircase. Holding her phone. Watching me. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. I walked out the door. Got in my car. And drove to the nearest motel. 4 miles away. The room was cheap. $39 a night. The mattress sagged in the middle. The shower curtain had a stain that looked like a map of something I didn't recognize. I sat in the car for 20 minutes before going inside. The key to the building downtown was in my coat pocket. I could feel it against the lining. I could have told her. Right there in that hallway. I could have said everything. But some truths are better delivered at the right time. The funeral was held 2 days later. A small church on Elm Street. The kind with old wooden pews and stained glass that had never been repaired. I arrived early. Linda and Cora were already there. Front row. Centered. Perfect. Linda wore black. Pearl earrings. Composed. Cora sat beside her, dressed just as carefully. There were 3 seats in the front row. 3. I didn't take any of them. I sat in the 3rd row. Between a stranger and an empty space. 5 minutes before the service, Maggie walked in. She didn't even glance at the front row. She came straight to me and sat down. She took my hand, held it firmly, and leaned in slightly. Your father prepared everything, she whispered. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. I could feel it. The service passed quietly. Neighbors spoke. The pastor said things about kindness and legacy. Someone described my father as a man who showed love through actions instead of words. That part was true. Afterward, outside in the parking lot, a neighbor approached me. Confused. Why weren't you sitting with the family? I looked past him. At Linda. Standing near the hearse. Accepting condolences like she had practiced that too. There were only 3 seats, I said. He didn't respond. He just nodded and walked away. Before people left, Linda made an announcement. Standing on the church steps, holding Cora's arm. Douglas was very clear, she said. The house is our family home. Cora and I will remain there, as he intended. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. What she didn't mention was the meeting scheduled for Thursday. The estate reading. The next morning, Linda began organizing everything. She called an appraiser. Walked him through the house. Watched him measure rooms, inspect walls, calculate value. $380,000. She wrote it down. Underlined it twice. Then she went to the bank. Requested account summaries. $140,000 in savings. She frowned. That wasn't what she expected. Is that everything? She asked. The teller checked again. Same answer. That was all. She went home. Sat at the kitchen table. Staring at the numbers. Cora came in. Is that it? She asked. Linda didn't answer right away. Then. What building? Cora looked confused. He used to mention something. At dinner. A building file. Linda froze. For a moment, the room went completely still. Then she reached for her phone. Called the attorney. Demanded an earlier meeting. But Thursday was the earliest. So she waited. And for the first time, she didn't feel in control. I stayed at the motel. 5 nights. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise. Lay there staring at the ceiling. Listening to trucks pass on the highway. Watching the pink glow from the neon sign outside shift across the walls. I didn't think about money. I thought about my father. The truck rides. The calculator. The way he raised his hand through the window. Grief doesn't care about numbers. It shows up anyway. On the 3rd day, I called my attorney. Mitchell Hale. I asked him one thing. Is everything still secure? He didn't hesitate. He listed everything. The building. The accounts. The properties. All of it is in your name, he said. None of it is part of the estate. I closed my eyes. I just needed to hear that. Then I asked. Will she challenge it? Yes, he said. Then after a pause. She won't win. I hung up. Sat on the edge of the bed. And stared at nothing. That night, I opened my laptop. Reviewed everything. Not because I needed to. But because it was the only thing that still felt like talking to him. The building alone was worth more than I had ever imagined when he first mentioned it. Everything he built quietly had worked. And no one in that house had ever known. Thursday came quietly. The law office was on the 2nd floor of an old brick building on Main Street. Narrow stairs. Worn carpet. A faint smell of paper and polish that never really leaves places like that. The conference room had a long oval table, 8 chairs, and a window overlooking a nearly empty parking lot. Everything about it felt controlled. Predictable. Linda arrived first. Black blazer. Perfect posture. The same pearl earrings. Cora sat beside her, holding her bag tightly in her lap. They chose the seats at the head of the table. Like it already belonged to them. Maggie came next. Calm. Quiet. Observing everything. She didn't sit near Linda. She sat halfway down the table. Two distant relatives arrived after that. Then me. With Mitchell. The moment we walked in, Linda's eyes went straight to him. Who is this? My attorney, I said. There was a pause. A small shift in the room. The will is simple, she replied, forcing a smile. There's no need for this. Mitchell didn't respond. He just sat down. The attorney, Harland, cleared his throat and opened the file in front of him. Before we begin, he said carefully, it's important to understand the structure of the estate. Linda nodded slightly. Confident. Harland began reading. To my wife, Linda Graves Irving, I leave the family residence, free and clear of any encumbrance, as well as the remaining balance of the joint savings account. Linda relaxed. Just slightly. To my stepdaughter, Cora Graves, I leave the sum of $20,000 from the education fund. Cora blinked. Confused. Harland closed the page. That concludes the probate estate. The room went still. Linda leaned forward. That's everything? Harland adjusted his glasses. Not exactly. Something shifted. Over the course of approximately 18 years, he continued, Douglas Irving executed a series of asset transfers during his lifetime. Linda's expression tightened. These assets are not part of the estate. They were legally transferred prior to his death. She didn't sit back. She didn't blink. Transferred to whom? Harland looked at me. To his daughter, Paige Irving. Silence. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. Linda stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. No, she said. That's not possible. Mitchell opened his briefcase. Calm. Precise. He placed the first folder on the table. The deed to a 6-story commercial building. Originally purchased by Douglas Irving. Transferred in stages, fully into Paige Irving's name. Second folder. Investment accounts. Index funds. Reinvested earnings. Additional property holdings. Third folder. A full valuation. He placed his hand on it. Total estimated value, approximately $28 million. No one moved. Cora stared at the table. The relatives looked at each other. Maggie simply nodded once. Linda didn't sit. She just stared at me. You knew, she said. Her voice was no longer controlled. You sat in my house every week, and you knew? I met her eyes. You changed the locks 4 hours after he died. The room went quiet again. Mitchell spoke once more. There is one additional matter. He placed a single sheet of paper in the center of the table. An $80,000 withdrawal from the joint account. Executed after Mr. Irving's death, using a power of attorney that had already expired. Linda's voice tightened. That was for the funeral. Mitchell nodded slightly. The funeral cost approximately $8,200. Silence. That leaves over $70,000 unaccounted for. No one looked at her. Harland spoke carefully. You may want to consult legal counsel regarding that transaction. Cora whispered, barely audible. Mom. But Linda didn't respond. For the first time in years. She had nothing to say. After a long moment, she slowly sat down. Not gracefully. Just sat. I gave him everything, she said quietly. I stayed. I took care of him. I built that house. No one interrupted. Maggie finally spoke. He loved you, she said. But he also knew something. Linda looked up. He knew Paige would never receive anything, unless he made sure of it himself. That was it. That was the truth. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just accurate. I stood up. Everyone looked at me. I didn't come here to take anything, I said. Everything I have has already been mine for years. I picked up my bag. From this point on, if you need anything, you go through my attorney. No anger. No raised voice. Just clarity. I turned toward the door. Then paused. You said the house is yours. I looked back once. Then keep it. And I left. No slam. No hesitation. Just a quiet, final close. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. I sat in my car for a long time. Hands on the steering wheel. Not moving. Then I cried. Not for the money. Not for the house. For my father. Because he had known. He had seen this moment years before it ever happened. And he didn't fight it with words. He planned for it. Carefully. Quietly. Every transfer. Every document. Every decision. 18 years of preparation. Not to punish anyone. But to protect me. I drove home that afternoon. Past the building. 6 floors of glass and brick. The name still on the front. Irving Commercial. I didn't change it. I never planned to. Because in the end, he didn't leave me money. He left me something far more valuable. The ability to stand on my own. Without ever needing permission.